Welcome everyone to today's webinar. Today we will focus on chapter annual reports. My name is Eric Guriel. I'm the SACNAS National Chapters Manager here at SACNAS. And in this webinar, I will provide an overview of the annual reports for chapters that will be due on May 1st. I'll go over the purpose of the annual reports, provide an overview of key information, and provide tips to facilitate the submission process. And at the end, you'll also have the ability to submit questions during the Q&A feature of this webinar. So the purpose of the chapter annual reports are, one, for the national organization to learn about the activity that our chapters are doing, and also for ways for us to learn better how we can best support you. It's required for you to remain an official SACNAS chapter, and it's also required to be eligible for chapter awards. So I'll go a little bit into more detail of each of these topics here. So for SACNAS, it's really important for us to learn about the activities that chapters do, the resources and tools that you're creating in your community, as well as ways for us to increase our support. So examples of this that, thanks to the information that we've learned in the past couple of years from our chapter reports, we've been able to establish or create a chapter resources page on our website. So if you go to our main chapter website, which is sacnas.org/chapters, you'll see a link to get to the chapter resources page. On there, you'll find examples of activities that chapters have done in the past. So there's like a large spreadsheet now that you can click on there. You'll see a large list of activities, and it's also categorized by the different types of activities. So for example, like professional development activities, community outreach, supportive ways that chapters help each other. So highly encourage you to check that out. You'll get a good idea just in general to see what other chapters are doing. On that resource page, you'll also find chapter branding and marketing toolkits. And then you'll also see recorded webinars that are focused on chapters, and we'll definitely have a lot more, including this one in 2021. So highly encourage you to check out that page. And again, all of that information was based on these annual reports. So they're very valuable for us to really learn how you are working at your community and how we can best support you in continuing those activities. The second reason that would require annual reports is that's the way that we sense to gauge that our chapters are official. So every year, as long as you submit your annual report, you'll continue to be considered an official SACNAS chapter. Some of the benefits or reasons to do that is so that you'll be listed on our chapter directory, which again, you can find from our sacnas.org/chapter page. That'll have all of our listed our official and our professional and our provisional chapters. So if you were previously approved for provisional status last year, you'll see that you're also listed on there. The second thing I have on here is chapter groups in the SACNAS online community. So again, that's something that was recently launched at the end of 2020. So we do have on one of those, on the chapter resources page, we did do a webinar back in December to talk a little bit more about the details of a SACNAS online community. So if you haven't had the opportunity, definitely encourage you to check that out. It's essentially a way for you within your SACNAS membership platform. There's a way for you to be able to basically use your individual chapter group to be able to communicate with the members inside of your chapter, and really use that as a way to communicate with each other. So there's like a community feed on there. You can use that in the moving forward as a way to manage your chapter rosters in real time. So you'll be able to see who's associated to your respective chapter. The other major benefit of using our SACNAS online community groups is that we also along with having your individual chapter group, we also have one large group called all chapter members. Again, similar features, right? The community feed, the forums that you can use, and basically member directory. You can use that as a way to be able to communicate and connect with other chapter members across the country. So not just members within your particular chapter, but members across different chapters. So highly encourage you to check that out if you're not already familiar with it. But that's one of the reasons of having those official groups, is so that we can make sure to include your members within that community. The third thing I have on here, chapter eligibility. So you'll be eligible for funds from SACNAS. So one example that we have is that one of our membership tiers for professional members, a percentage of their membership dues they can actually allocate to particular chapters. So that is one way that we can identify for your chapter to be listed on those eligible lists to get those contributions from membership fees, is to make sure that you continue to remain as a official SACNAS chapter. And then the last thing I have on here is your chapter members would be eligible for additional opportunities. So for this year, we are going to be doing a chapter leadership institute during the SACNAS National Conference. That'll be an opportunity for your leaders to participate and kind of get more leadership experience as a chapter member. So that's just one of the examples that we have that your members would be eligible as long as they're part of an official SACNAS chapter. So required to be eligible for chapter awards. Every year we have our chapter awards. I would mention, I'm not going to go too much into detail here because we'll have a similar webinar to this one that we're providing an overview for chapter annual reports. We'll have a similar webinar later down the road that focuses specifically on chapter awards. But essentially, they're a way that we use to highlight chapters that are doing excellent work throughout the year. This year's page for that website still hasn't been updated, but we're in the works of kind of analyzing the categories that we have and kind of just trying to make that more equitable for some of our smaller chapters as well as some of the larger ones. So again, more information on that will be coming down the road. But I just wanted to mention it here because you do have to submit an annual report in order to be eligible for a chapter award. So now I kind of want to transition a little bit more into the actual report. So in order to access the report, you'll have to go to the chapter website. I'll say this website many times, sacnas.org/chapters. And then within there, you'll see the link to the chapter annual reports page. That page will have a lot of this information that I'm going through during this webinar. So definitely get familiar with that page. Chapter annual reports are going to be due May 1st. So I know we still have a long ways to go, but one of the reasons I wanted to do this webinar is to make sure that you have enough time to be able to get familiar with the process, start looking at the information on there, and then basically try to get started as early as you can. I know at the time of recording this webinar, there's still going to be minor changes to that page, but it's essentially like 90% updated, but it should be fully updated, I would say, by the end of next weekend. For those of you watching the recording afterwards, it should be updated by then. So I want to go over 4 key things. So essentially, once you go on that page, if you scroll down at the top, you'll see kind of some of this information a little bit more in detail. And then on the second half of the page, you'll essentially see a form that you essentially submit. One thing to note is that you'll have to submit everything all at once. So I'll provide a little bit more details, but just so that you have a context. And if you were a chapter last year, it's essentially going to be a very similar form to what you experienced last year. But for the things I really want to highlight for the roster or for the reports this year, chapter membership roster, chapter advisor report, institutional recognition, and a timeline of activities. So I'll go a little bit more into detail here. So for the rosters, we're requiring that all chapter members, including your advisors, have active SACNAS membership. So your members have the options to sign up for free or upgrade to one of the various membership levels. So you can get more particular information about those levels at sacnas.org/membership. So on our page, we do have a template that we ask you to please use as your final submission of the roster. It's essentially a very simple Excel spreadsheet, which will ask you to submit the following information from your members. So like first name, last name, their role in their chapter. So if they're your advisor, the president, secretary, or if they're just a general member that don't hold a particular office position, you can just identify them as general members. We'll ask for your email or the members' individual email addresses. And the key thing here is to please make sure that the email address that's submitted on this roster is the one that they have associated to their SACNAS membership. So again, all your members should have an active SACNAS membership. There's also that free option, that free SACNista level. So if they don't already have one, I highly encourage you to at least have them sign up for the free one. And also please use this template when you're submitting, because as we're verifying, having it all submitted in an Excel spreadsheet or a comma separated CSV file makes that a whole lot easier for us versus having just like a screenshot or a PDF, because that's a little bit more challenging. So yeah, that's chapter rosters. And again, the template's going to be on the website. Ideally, in the long run, we envision not necessarily having you submit these Excel files, but utilizing those chapter groups that I mentioned before on the SACNAS online community, and then just ensuring that your chapter rosters are updated on there, because again, we can monitor those in real time. But for this year, we'll still kind of, as we kind of transition into that phase, we'll still ask for this Excel spreadsheet roster. The next thing I have on here is the chapter advisor report. This is essentially a report written by your chapter advisor or advisors if you have multiple, essentially covering the activities that you did in the past academic year. So if you do have multiple advisors, all we need is just like one letter that can be basically signed off by all of your advisors, so you don't necessarily have to submit multiple individual reports. We'll just require that you just have one letter that they work on it together if you do have multiple. And that one, we do ask that it's a PDF file. Some of the things for advisors to consider addressing when they're doing that report is how often did your advisors meet with your chapter officers? What mentoring or guidance support did advisors provide to the SACNAS members, or your chapter members, I should say? And then how did your advisor promote the chapter at your institution? And then what areas do you think your chapter needs more support in for the next academic year? So those are kind of some talking points that we recommend that advisors address in their letter or their report. Third thing on here we have is institutional recognition. So one of the requirements that we have for our chapters is that, or at least our student chapters, is that you're recognized at your school as an official student organization. And we expect that all chapter should be registered and in compliance with all policies relating to the student organizations at your institution. So basically what we need for this section here is either a letter or an email confirming that you're part of a student or that you're an official student organization on your campus. This could be like a letter from that student organization body. It could be the staff email confirming that, or if your organization does have like a website with a list of all the official student organizations, like you can even just send us a screenshot of that along with the link to that address on there so that we can quickly verify. So any of those is all that we really need. And again, this is just to make sure that your chapter is still in compliance with your school's policies with all that. The last thing I have on here that I wanted to cover is timeline of activities. So I know this year was definitely a very difficult year with COVID and everything. So we don't expect that chapters did the same amount of activity as you previously do in the past. But for the activities that you were able to do with your members, I don't think this particular section is on our website yet. I think this is one of the ones I still need to add, but essentially I'll add a template to the webpage. I think it's going to be a Word document. Essentially 3 key things that we just asked for each activity is just the date of the activity, the name of the activity, and then like a 1 to 3 sentences to just shortly describe the purpose or the goal of the activity. Doesn't have to be super detailed, just again, like 1 to 3 sentences. That kind of just gives us a better idea of what are some of these activities that you're doing. And again, we don't expect you to do like that you previously had in this past year, like 1 or 2 activities per month, which we typically ask for in previous years, just because this past year was very crazy. So again, we don't have like that minimum of like, okay, you needed to have an X amount of activities. We just want to make sure that you did at least some activities for this year and making sure that you're still have at least your core group of members together and that you're planning to continue to be active in the upcoming year. The last thing I want to cover on here before I turn it over to any Q&As is kind of just very general tips for submission. So the first thing is really just get started early. That was one of the major reasons. I know even though the page isn't fully updated yet, I at least wanted to have this webinar relatively early in the process to at least kind of announce annual reports are coming up and give you that opportunity to start getting familiar with the process and like the information that we're going to be asking for. So yeah, just starting early. The second thing I have on here is really just meet with your officers and really trying to split up the work, right? So we don't expect one person to basically do all the work from your chapter to do all the work, which I don't think would be fair. So I highly encourage you to get together with your officers and your advisor as well, or advisors, and really kind of just go over the report, look at all the questions that are going to be on there. And again, the form was going to be updated soon, so there might be some changes, but definitely by the end of next week, it'll be fully ready to go. And we'll make sure to also send out emails to kind of make that formal announcement that the annual report submissions, we're going to start collecting them. So at that point, when you do see that email, you'll know that everything is up to date and ready to submit. So yeah, definitely just look at some of those things, especially those 4 key things that I talked about, right? The roster, the advisor report, the institutional recognition, and the activities list. I highly encourage you all to like split that work up. Like if you don't already have some of that, kind of delegate some of that work to certain members to at least get the ball rolling there. As you're going through this process, definitely feel free to reach out to me and ask questions. I'm available at chapters@sacnas.org. We can also have a conversation in the SACNAS online community. So I'll also post on the all chapter members group. I'll post if anybody has any questions on there. So maybe we can have a conversation on there that like everybody can see your questions in case there are similar questions that do come up after this webinar, right? So we'll have a Q&A right now so that you can ask questions now, but later down the road, if other things come up after you've had a time to kind of start looking at the forum and the information that we ask, we can address them on there as well, or you can just email me directly. And the last thing is just submitting as soon as you can. Just because I know the springtime is going to be very busy. It typically is, especially like around May. And again, that's why I wanted to share this information early so that we highly encourage you not necessarily to wait to the last minute when things get really busy, but like if you have access to that information now, and if you already have a lot of that information compiled that you're tracking throughout the year, I highly encourage you to just submit your annual reports as soon as you can, and just get it over with so that it's one less thing that you have to worry about. I think that's everything that I have on here. So yeah, now we can transition to our Q&A. So if you do have any questions, reminder to use the Q&A feature. Be polite, mindful, and respectful in the chat. And when asking the questions, feel free to share your institution and your location. Excuse me. So I will stop sharing my screen for a moment until see if we have any questions. Okay, so Juan Carlo asks, what would you please repeat what is needed for the advisor report? Sure. And I'll also remind you, Giancarlo, that this information will also be on the website. So if you ever need to go back and reference it again, but I will quickly bring up that slide again. I think I actually just mentioned it. So the things again, Giancarlos, are for the advisor report, essentially, how often did your advisor meet with your chapter officers? What mentoring or guidance did the advisor provide chapter members? How did the advisors promote the chapter to the institution? And in what areas did your chapter need support in for the next academic year? Oh, okay. Giancarlo, I see you're from the NIH chapter. I know you're slightly kind of like a hybrid. So I'll actually reach out to you directly because I know for our professional chapters, we'll have a slightly different report just because professional reports are slightly different than the student one. So this one is particularly focused on the student one, but definitely shoot me an email. I'd like to connect with you and then kind of go over the specific details of what we would require for your particular chapter. Thank you for the question though. Let's see, Ephraim asked, do new members that applied last month still... Okay, so Ephraim, essentially, if you're waiting right now to hear about your provisional status because you recently applied to become a new chapter, you don't have to submit an annual report for this this window here because you'll basically just recently be approved as a new chapter, but you'll basically be essentially asked to submit the similar report or the same annual report in 2022. And then at that point, that's when your chapter would be considered official after that first year of provisional status. And I think I also had a similar question for the chapters that are currently provisional status that that were approved basically last year in 2020 to be provisional chapters, you'll need to submit this annual report this year, so that then you can be considered an official SACNAS chapter, since this will be your first full year of being a SACNAS chapter. Marlene, thank you for your or not question, but your comment. So I know you're one of the ones at UC San Diego that is currently in that first year of provisional status. So yeah, if you have any questions, definitely feel free to reach out to me, as I know this is going to be your chapter's first annual report, but you'll essentially fill out the same report so that you can be considered an official chapter as well. Let's see here. Question from Larissa. Correct, Larissa. So your chapter is one of the ones that is currently being reviewed for provisional status. So you will not have to submit an annual report for 2021 because again, after your application's reviewed, assuming that you are approved for provisional status, this year, essentially, we won't ask you to submit a report until next year because we don't expect you to have all that information since you're just getting approved as a SACNAS chapter. I think I saw one more somewhere on here. Oh no, we already addressed that one. All right. So I will move on. Submit any more last minute questions if you have any, but in the meantime, I'll just do a couple more slides here. I think I'm already sharing my screen. Yeah. Okay, here we go. So yeah, just to kind of wrap up here, as I know we're getting close to the end of the time, I just want to mention that we have several, as I mentioned earlier, as part of our new resources, chapter webinars. I highly encourage you to check out sacnas.org/webinars to see all upcoming chapter and just in general webinars that we have for all of our members. And then we'll have all the pre-recorded ones on there as well, as long as we'll also post all the SACNAS related chapter webinar recordings on our chapter resources page that I mentioned earlier. At the end of this webinar, you'll get a prompt to take a survey. We highly encourage you to please submit that. That provides us really great feedback on today's webinar and suggestions for future webinars. And finally, if you enjoyed today's webinar, you can help us produce more webinars like this by making a donation in any amount at sacnas.org/donate or find other ways to support us. Your donation will go towards more vital programming like this, as well as year-round programs like chapters and leadership. So with that being said, thank you all for being on this webinar. Thank you all for the questions. And with that, that concludes our webinar. Have a great day.